Welcome, everybody. We're excited to have you here for our latest in our Code Chats series, which today is going to be discussing open standards, open future, the power of open and open source in the world of DevTools. To kick things off, we'll talk maybe a little bit more by what we mean about open standards, but I would love to really start with a round of introductions. Andrew, you're right next to me on my screen. Do you want to start us off?
I'm Andrew Norris, co-founder and CEO over here at DevCycle. Excited to share a little bit about our journey to open standard, open feature as a project, and how we pivoted our business to adopt and really promote those core tenets of our business.
Hi, everyone. I'm Gloria. I'm the VP Finance here at DevCycle, and I also help with running the operations and supporting Andrew and helping the team with this pivot. Really excited to join and talk more about it.
Gloria, don't undersell yourself. So finance, business operations, and strategy, or FBOSS, as we say internally. Gloria is really the one who runs everything around here.
And my name's Andrew. I'm the developer relations manager here at DevCycle. And yeah, excited to be one of your hosts for our session today. If you are listening to our session today and would like to share a thought, please jump in and request to speak. And I'd love to be able to add you into the conversation. First things first, I want to start with a little bit of information on what we mean when we say open standards. Open source is well known and well understood in this world. It is about the way you are sharing and licensing the code you're creating. There's tons of great stuff out there in the world around open source. And one of the kind of organizations that I think has really been leading the way with supporting open source is the Linux Foundation. Yes, it is. It's the same Linux as Linux. And they support a number of open source projects. In fact, I think they support almost 1,000 different open source projects. But they're also one of the major organizations behind this concept of open standards. And what open standards are focused on is making it easier for everybody to do the kind of work that they are doing with technology by having a shared set of language and values and systems that enable people to build on top of these standards in a really impactful way. There's a bunch of these open standards that are out there, and there's open standards that exist outside of just the world of DevTools or the Linux Foundation, but they're really intended to be generally available to the public and then maintained via a collaborative consensus group. So that's really the idea of open standards. Two of them that I want to draw focus to because they tie into each other are, first off, open telemetry. If you've never heard of open telemetry, it is a way to have a shared language around telemetry data. It's a collection of APIs and SDKs and tools that allow you to instrument generate, collect, and export telemetry data, metrics, logs, and traces. The team behind encouraging this world of open telemetry is an organization named Dynatrace. Dynatrace is a telemetry company. Like, they focus on metrics and logs and traces. And there's lots of other players in this space like Datadog and LogRocket and all the rest of these people. But what Dynatrace saw was this focus on open standards being important. And so they championed this open telemetry standard. And since, like, open telemetry has become huge. And more recently, they pivoted into doing this for feature flags. There's a new standard called OpenFeature, which is the same idea. It's a collection of APIs, SDKs, and tools, but instead of using them for collecting and generating metrics, logs, and traces, it's focused on making feature flagging easier and enabling folks to use feature flags without having to worry about things like vendor lock-in or specific language that's being used elsewhere. So that's a lot of you talking, explaining the idea of open standards here. But I want to pose a question to both Andrew and Gloria, because you're not developers. You are running a dev tool company. I have a feeling that open source had come into your life before. What was your impression of the world of open source in terms of running a business when it first came into your life?
I'll start, Andrew, for some context. We've been, as a business, have been operating since 2013, I believe, and building SaaS platforms. Our first product was a platform called Topletics, which was more of an A/B testing focused platform than DevCycle now being a feature flagging, feature management first platform. And building even back 10 years ago with Topletics, open source was really deeply integrated into a lot of the architecture and systems and technologies that we use to build out our product. And so we use it as a base level foundation for a lot of these approaches and systems and others before us had developed that allows us to like Lego pieces to build our platform, adding our proprietary approach to things. I always looked at open source under the lens of being a tool that our engineering and product team can use to augment what we're building, having a say when some systems needed changes to fit our use case. We dipped our toe into open source by contributing to those projects. Open source has been in the product and engineering world for a while. On the business side, I think two thoughts. One is that you were either an open source company or a closed source proprietary technology company. That was my perception before we arrived. And the other thing is that with Topletics, we spent a lot of time supporting larger enterprise organizations. They had a certain degree of sensitivity around open source to making sure the licensing was right. We did spend quite a bit of time understanding the rules and configurations of the licenses to make sure that they were appropriate for the use cases. Copyleft versus what is commercially allowed, what is not commercially allowed, and reporting back on that. There's several tools that we use over the years, especially going through things like RFPs or doing security documentation as part of larger enterprise deals. That was my previous experience around open source and how it was relevant when we were strictly a proprietary software company.
And what about you, Gloria? Where did open source pop into your world?
I'll be completely honest, coming from a finance background and accounting, I didn't know much about it. What I knew from our team and the passion within our team was that we strongly believe feature flagging should be applied everywhere. Aligning ourselves to OpenFeature makes sense because that just unlocks more possibility for teams everywhere and not to have it necessarily be feature flagging tied to a specific vendor. We wholeheartedly agree that it should be used as a common practice. That seems to line up with OpenFeature as well. That's my understanding of it.
No, I love that. So I think that it's interesting because in the world of technology, like we're focusing on this idea of open. I feel like this concept of open standards is a little bit more, especially in the DevTools space, is a newer kind of concept here. From a business value perspective, I'm curious from both you, Andrew, and Gloria, do you think that technology companies in the DevTools space moving forward are going to focus on, if you're not fully adopting open source because you can't, because of your business model, you're at least going to have to adopt open standards, or risk losing customers or end users?
As we look at the way different companies are structuring themselves, there's sort of three approaches. Traditionally, as we were starting to build DevCycle in early 2022, we had this choice ourselves. Do we create sort of the foundation of an A/B testing platform, a fully open source project, similar to what Flagsmith has done, Leash has done in the space? And as we were going through development, we stumbled upon this third way, adopting an open standard approach. The business logic behind it is when we look at companies like Flagsmith or friends of ours at Offset, where they created SpiceDB, a branch of Google's Ansibar project, they basically have two business entities. They have Offset, the commercial platform, and SpiceDB, an open source project that anyone interested in this type of server technology can contribute to. A lot of companies have been very successful. Vercel with Next.js was a great example. As we look at our specific industry, feature flagging, there's no shortage of easy, free, or open source ways to get a basic feature flagging platform up and running. It can be nothing more than a log file stored somewhere. Things like FlagD, which is part of the OpenFeature community as a project, free project, like a very easy way for someone to get started. We didn't feel like coming up with our own open source version of a feature flagging platform that we then commercialize with a more enterprise offering was adding much value to the space. Our ideal customer profile, our ideal user was really more focused around someone who has gone through that early stages of development and building a team to the point that multiple people are contributing on an ongoing basis in part of those releases. We were okay letting the free or open source solution own the individual devs or very small dev teams. We came across Open Telemetry first, as Andrew laid out in the intro. His Dynatrace team seen a lot of success with the Open Telemetry project, which is now adopted by Datadog or basically any observability platform out there over the last couple of years. They started a feature flag standard. It wasn't even connected to a specific vendor at that point. We saw this as a great opportunity where we can provide a lot of the benefits of open source by backing that project and putting our business thought process around it by first removing the barrier to vendor lock-in by transportability from one solution to the next. We've built some contributed tools to Open Feature project on top of the other SDK work, make it easy to migrate between different solutions. Our philosophy as a product or as a company is to be the best developer experience in the feature flagging space. We want to win by how much developers enjoy using the platform every day. It didn't matter to us to lock someone in. If we weren't doing our jobs right, very good signal to us that we needed to change product direction and focus, but we luckily haven't seen that since launching. Backing the Open Feature project was a strategic decision, to be honest, more than an engineering decision, both to establish ourselves as open standard to the core. All of our SDKs are built on top of the open standard. We support all the languages the project supports. We contribute on the governance. Andrew, in his role, helped a lot with the marketing of the project, sort of partnership with the Dynatrace team. So it was less of a technology decision, more of a strategic alignment decision. Then the technology contributions came afterwards. I think it's a good middle way for teams to own the proprietary logic and secret sauce of what we have built in terms of product experience and interface and the structure of how we do feature flagging and doing things at edge. It makes sense for us as a solution, but may not make sense in every use case. And so it wouldn't make sense to be a standalone open source project. This sort of third way should become the default in the future. We're big believers in that for our space and others, that the old days of you buy an Adobe product, you can never get your data, you can never get your events, you can never get anything that you build within that out of that platform or over. As we're talking to larger enterprises, they're valuing that. A lot of credit to the Open Telemetry project and Dynatrace for leading the way in the observability space. Our bet is that everyone in the world who's building a feature flag platform, whether that's just an internal platform or looking to buy a SaaS platform, should be considering, does it have open feature support going forwards? And I think that's going to be transferable to a lot of other industries as well. I love that.
I want to say welcome to folks that are listening in. Mika, Michael, thanks for being here. Thanks for being part of the conversation. If you'd like to contribute your thoughts, I know Michael leads an open source project called Leaf PHP, which we've done a lot of content around. It's such a great micro framework. Super happy to bring you on if you're interested, and feel free to request. But I'm curious, Gloria, and Andrew's talked a lot about the business case here. As the person defining the financial decisions, what's your take for a company that is, say, somebody has come to them on their team and is saying, listen, we think that we need to invest time and money and resources into this world of open source or open standards. And they're trying to convince somebody that doesn't have this technology background that this is a good idea. What would you say to other folks in a leadership position trying to make sure investments are going into the right place that might help them understand the value?
The team is really excited about it, which is great for the company. On top of that, where we've really seen the value is that customers are excited about it, or prospective people. We've had people come in and say, hey, I've seen that you guys have attached yourself to really embracing OpenFeature. I'm really curious about learning more about your product. And that's just such a easier way to talk about product when they're already excited about it, as opposed to the direct selling model where you're begging them to try the product and getting them into some sort of trial period. Whereas here, it's just happening so much more naturally because they see that we're excited, that we're supporting this great standard, that we're really working hard on. They see the work that the team's doing. It's so much more of a natural conversation. That's the traditional and finance sense. What you're looking for is ultimately people that are paying customers. And I think we're really starting to see that momentum here.
But I think it makes a lot of sense for the type of go-to-market structure that we have here at DevCycle, which is product-led growth, or as we call developer-led growth. We don't have a traditional outbound sales team emailing people. We spend very little on traditional ad spends and putting up billboards. The success and growth we've seen is all organic from folks hearing about us, telling others in their network about the platform. And so for that model, our preferred approach is we want someone to come into the platform, kick the tires, play with it themselves, and decide either, okay, this is great, I'll just put in my credit card and go. Or for larger businesses, which we've seen a lot as well, is a small team of maybe 2 or 3 devs will kick the tires on the project for a week or two and ask to speak to a member of our team, just understand how it fits their use cases and if they see special enterprise type needs, how we can address those. And that model works really well from both like cost efficiency, but more than that, from really allowing developers to buy and evaluate products naturally. Having an open standard approach helps by increasing the level of developer trust. They can deploy this software, and even if something happens down the road, they don't have to redo their work. They can just transpose it from one vendor solution to an in-house solution or another vendor option. We want to compete on the value that people see from the product, ease of use of the product, how developer friendly it is, not the fact that you're locked into us for years and there's no other option. Breaking down the barriers across all the other feature flag platforms in the industry puts us in a disruptor and advantageous position, because the work required to migrate from one solution to other is much lower in an open standards world. There's a definite sales advantage to that. We're very friendly with a lot of the other platforms because they focus on different types of development teams, different use cases. What's right for our customers may not be right on another platform and vice versa. And that's okay. That's part of a natural, healthy ecosystem. I think open standards at its core can elevate the whole space to compete on identifying the best solution for different customer bases and use cases. To me, that's the future of the space and the future of DevTools in general.
Yeah, I agree. I think for anybody that's listening, if you Google Open API, which used to be called Swagger, that's another example of a spec that is followed. And it's a way to create so with Swagger / like Open API, like it is very focused around having a standardized way that we build our APIs. You want to have standard ways and standard responses, because if everybody's building an API in their own way, it's going to make it really challenging for anybody even building extensions. Like, we're not even talking just about that. Andrew's talked a lot about vendor lock-in, but we're also talking about if you want to build an integration for a platform and you've got to learn all of their idiosyncratic things they have created, you're likely not going to go with them. If you could build an extension that you're going to be able to use on multiple platforms with multiple APIs, you're much more likely to do that. Looking at that kind of concept is huge. And another example here is Auth0. I keep being Auth0 because we use them at DevCycle and they've done a very good job at their branding to be so connected. But that's another great example. Open authentication. Of course, that's the way that we do third-party services. It's like how you can use SSO with things like Google and Facebook. Anytime you go to a site and you get the login with Google, the number of sites that have login with X technology has grown. Basically, you can log in with anything to a site. I've seen so many new platforms that if they've got an authentication system, you can use their system to log in elsewhere, or you can log into their system with somebody else. And it just builds, I think, this sense of community, which Gloria really spoke to before, right? If engineers are happy building it, other engineers are going to be happy using it. and are going to want to have conversations about this. We are in a corporate space, we're trying to make money and all the rest of this stuff, but there's a million tools that exist on the market for any given problem space. This idea of being open to sharing some knowledge and sharing some experience and using this universal way for people to interact with your technology that's not going to have them require to learn something brand new, I think is incredibly important. We've talked about some different standards. We talked a lot about OpenFeature, and Andrew did mention I'm involved there. Your technology is like super welcome to add you to the conversation, and you can take the stage and kind of share that perspective. In the meantime, I'm curious. Obviously, DevCycle has been around for a couple of years, but Tabalytics has been around much longer. And we've been in existence through a lot of different iterations of popular trends on the internet. Do we think this is just a trend? Do we think that open source is just and open standards are just a trend that's going to disappear like so many other trends that are out there, right? Like Web3, lots of people built around Web3. Do we think that open standards and this open source, maybe not open source, because I think that's a larger piece that stood the test of time, but certainly this growth of open standards, is that going to stick around, or are we going to see companies going back to their own proprietary things because they need to make that money? I'm curious about your thoughts, Gloria and Andrew.
When you look at what's the thing that open standards is solving, what it really is like creating that cross industry approach. So I think you're going to see holdouts, folks that don't adopt this. I don't see Adobe necessarily adopting these standards anytime soon because they don't need to. They have a large enterprise sales engine. That's where they make their money. But for those who go across more of the broad spectrum of the market, the more of these open standards that emerge, the healthier the ecosystem will evolve. And I think run open standard project that doesn't restrict vendors from doing certain things that they see as valuable, those are the ones that are going to stand out. Those that try and be too prescriptive over what you can and can't do, I think those are the ones that long-term may not last, because at the end of the day, if something with the standard is preventing you from being able to iterate on your products or introduce some new technology or different approach, that will be limiting. Holding back innovation is never a long-term success story. I think we will see continued adoption of this. Open API has been around for almost 10, 15 years now. So I see them staying around for the long haul. The question is, how widely adopted do they get, especially at the higher end brand, like the large enterprise adopting them really depends on the internal culture and the decision-making team at that organization. Some, teams, they have an ingrained customer base that they don't want to open up to potential competition and see that lock-in as sort of part of the value of the business. And those will be resistant to do that. In the ecosystem, if there is a long-term evolution, it's for more blending between an open standard and a fully open source project. You're creating pathways to not just the standards being common, but some of the underlying structures of these technologies being truly open source across the board. To me, that's where the trend line is going.
Awesome. And what's your take, Gloria?
Well, I very much agree with what Andrew's saying. We certainly don't see it going away anytime soon. I think from early indications from what we've been hearing, people are excited about this and they want to do it. I don't think it's something that's just trendy and flashy and just die.
Absolutely. I did this in the last stream because we were talking about AI DevTools and Awesome Lists. If you've never heard of Awesome Lists, go to Google and search. There's Awesome Lists done by Cindrasaurus. Cindrasaurus. Last week, we found one that was Awesome AI DevTools. There's actually an Awesome Open Standards repo, which is fantastic and focuses on some other standards that are out there. And it's funny because some of these I don't think of standards, but they definitely are. HTML is a standard. JSON is a standard that's out there. But when you look at things named in this kind of way, obviously Open API and some of the other open things we talked about, also OpenSSL. So if you're ever connecting to or wanting to have a general purpose cryptography and securing of communication, there's OpenSSL. You've probably used that before. There's OpenTelemetry, we talked about, OpenSSH. The ones that I find interesting, and this is less on the hard coder technology side and more just on the general technology side, Did you know that there is an open document format? I feel like I must have used an ODF at some point, but I didn't realize at the time that it was actually this open standard for building great documents. And there's also an open font format, which is an extension of TrueType. So if you've ever installed a font on your device, it's generally like a TTF file, but there is actually an OFF file, which is a universal standard. The great piece about this is that these open standard pieces are focused on every niche within the world of technology. Recognizing that standards are going to take off is probably one of the most important things that we can do right now, is just to show our support for this power of open in the world of DevTools, and hopefully that will pay dividends down the road. We record all these sessions. We also upload them to YouTube with a visualizer and the text. I want to throw back to both Andrew and Gloria. The title of this space was Open Standards, OpenFeature, the Power of Open in DevTools. I'm really curious, what do you think the superpower of this concept of open is in the world of DevTools?
I would say accessibility for all different types of companies and development teams, whether you're a 1 or 2 person early stage project or a 10,000 size engineering team at a large enterprise. We've seen that full spectrum of scale adopt open standards and promote it, the true expandability. You can start learning and adopting an open standard in school or as you're getting started in your career, and that knowledge can carry forward to the biggest company out there. I think that the power of that is immense, and both for the individual and for the organizations that adopt it. Good shout out on the ODF. I remember when that came up as a Microsoft Office competitor, it forced Microsoft to open the docx format to be an open standard. So any developer out there could use that platform. It prevents ODF from really taking off as the de facto new document standard. That's probably my first run in with an open standard. Thanks for bringing up a memory from maybe 10, 15 years ago.
I love that.
I think not being held to a specific vendor, it frees up a lot for people, and not having to learn certain closed systems, having this knowledge be shared across different companies, or for someone that will probably join multiple companies in their career, just opens that knowledge to transfer to different environments, which I think is really important too.
If you've got a thought on what you think the superpower of open is in DevTools, please comment in the thread. We want to have a conversation about this. Come on over to our Discord server. If you go to the DevCycle website and look under resources, you'll find a direct link to our Discord server there. We're really focused around building a community around this kind of stuff. With that, we'll call our space for today, but don't worry. We're going to keep doing these every week and try some different time slots as the weeks go by. We'll probably do this next Wednesday as well, because we're all on site in Toronto. And we'll have a topic next week. We'll announce it on Monday. Tuned for more information on all of our social media channels here on X, and then on all of the different places as well. I think that with all of that said, we are going to call it. Thank you to Andrew and Gloria for being here. Thanks to Michael, Mika, and Parth, and everybody else who tuned in today. We'll be back next week, and hopefully we'll see you then. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye. Thanks.